Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Get Hired Live. I'm your host, Andrew Seaman, LinkedIn's managing editor for jobs and career development, coming to you live from Pennsylvania. Correct, I'm not in my usual spot, but I'm so happy to be here with all of you, and I'm happy that you're joining us. As always, I want to ask you to introduce yourselves in the comments. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from, maybe what you want to get out of your job search or your career, and then what I want you to do is network with each other. So maybe you see someone in the comments who's in the same field as you or the same industry, or maybe they're in the industry or area that you want to move into. So reach out to them, start a conversation. And some of the best conversations that happen after the show are the ones where people job search together. They talk about their careers, maybe they talk about what's happening in their industry. Really, networking is the foundation of a successful job search and career, and there's no better time to start than right now. And today we're talking about some of the little bumps that you will likely encounter during your career. Unfortunately, you've probably seen the headlines about layoffs and furloughs happening around the country, and we're going to be diving into all of that today. And while the fundamentals of job searching don't change, what you can do differently is take some steps after a layoff to make sure you're setting yourself up for success. But before we get into that, I want to say hi to some of the people who are joining us in the comments. We have James from New Jersey, we have Jill from Florida, Joey from Washington, Carlos from Virginia. We have Mohammed, we have Balroop, we have Waleed, we have Tracy, and we have Fareed. Welcome to all of you. And like I said, keep introducing yourselves in the comments, and we'll be getting to your questions at the end of the show. And today, as we have been doing for the past few weeks, we're doing things a little bit differently. So we released an episode of my podcast, Get Hired with Andrew Seaman, on Wednesday with Ebony Joyce talking all about what to do after a layoff. And now she's joining us today. Ebony Joyce is the Career Clarity Coach. So I want to bring her onto the screen. Welcome, Ebony.
Hi. Well, thank you. I was going to say welcome
Yeah.
to you.
Well, no, I'm always happy to be here. So thanks so much, Ebony. Well, and let's dive into this topic. And we've talked about it on the podcast, and I know you got some questions after the podcast, and that's what this show is for, to make sure that we're answering people's questions about maybe what we didn't discuss, things like that. But can you tell us first of all, what is a career clarity coach, and sort of how did you get into that business?
Yeah. So what I do is I work with mid and senior level corporate professionals to really find their ideal career, right? And so a lot of times we go to school and we pick a we pick a major and we just kind of go with it, and it just starts our lives and starts our careers. But what I do is help people really identify, what it is that they want to do in their career and the impact that they want to make. And so not just living out our careers, just going through the nuances that we do, but really finding that thing that really lights us up, and it's fulfilling for us. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, no, I think that, and it's also so important to be clear about your career. Obviously there are exploration times, but you also always want to be sort of moving toward the direction of, what is actually happening, with my passions, with where my life is leading me. So I think that's such an important area to help people out with. And I just want to take a few more moments to say hi to other people who are joining us in the stream. We have Nan from Colorado, we have Karen from California, we have Fred from Calgary, Rebecca from Georgia, Cyril from Houston, Julie from Florida, Wai Ling from the UK, Shauna from Washington, Shayla from New Hampshire, Lisa from Minnesota, and Rika from India. So welcome to all of you. And
Welcome.
yeah, no, that's quite a bit. So, Ebony, the next thing I wanted to ask you about was really, for people who haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast yet, and I suggest you all do. So go to wherever you like to listen to podcasts and look for Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. But can you tell us really, like, what are the top 3 or 4 things that people should do after a layoff?
Yeah. So the first thing you want to do is really pause, right? So we'll get into that. Check your financial resources. Um, create a habit and a sense of normalcy back into your life. And then you want to get out there and start that networking, relationship building, job searching process. So those are like my top four.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. And also, you mentioned pausing, and I just want to remind everyone, I'm going to take a pause here to remind everyone to get your questions in about job searching, about what to do after a layoff, or what happens if you're furloughed. Get those all in the comments because we're going to be taking those in just a few seconds. But Ebony, we talked a little bit before the show about this idea of a pause. I'm a big proponent of it. But a lot of people, I think they misunderstand when they hear pause because they say, listen, I have bills to pay, I have children, I have a spouse, I have a house, I need to keep these things up. So they sort of say, why would I ever pause? Or why would I ever take that short break? And we're just talking really a few days. We're not saying take a month or two off. So can you tell us really a little bit more about this pause and why it's so beneficial and, what to do if you can't take one?
Absolutely. So I think pausing is important. One reason why I say pause is because you do want to process what has happened. I mean, you've just gone through a loss, and a loss in your career is still in. It still needs to have that grieving process that any other loss has to go through. So we still have to take that time to really process it before we can decide if we even want to pivot. Because sometimes we don't want to go back into the same thing. I know for myself personally, I've experienced a few layoffs. I've been let go, and I've taken a month. I actually took a year in one of the times where I was laid off to decide on what it was I really wanted to do next. Now that does not mean, like you just mentioned, that I didn't do anything within that time period, but I did use some of that time to decide if I wanted to re-enter the workforce, what part of the workforce I wanted to re-enter. And so for some of us, yes, we don't have again, we talk about that financial cushion that you may have, or checking your assets or checking your finances. For some of us, we don't have the luxury to not go without that work, and we don't have the opportunity to pause. But just taking a moment to just to reflect on that, to know that being laid off is not about you. So that's the important thing. I think that sometimes it can really have a really blow to our confidence. And so that is the reason why I say to pause and make sure that you're not internalizing that to mean that you're, less than because you no longer are employed. Because sometimes our we tie our identity to what we do in our careers, and making sure you have not done that to where you can go back out and look for that new role and not necessarily have that confidence, or that self-worth that we hold so dearly onto when it comes to our careers. So that's the reason I say to take that pause and take that moment.
Yes, and I completely agree. I'm a big fan of pauses, and I see Ahmad in the comments say, "What pause? We have to put food on the table." And yeah,
Yes.
everyone does. And what I always tell people is that even if it's just a day, to sort of take your time and say, "Okay, what am I going to do tomorrow? Am I going to take steps that will put me on the same career path I was on? Am I going to take steps to put me on a different career path?" Oftentimes layoffs and things like that are an opportunity for you to pivot. Maybe it's not the time you wanted to do it, but that's what we saw during the pandemic. We had so many people who said, you know what, I don't really want to be doing this anymore. So they use that opportunity to say, I want to go into a new field, a new career. So it's not about sort of taking a ton of time off if you don't have that luxury. And if you do want to take maybe some longer time off, you could always take a bridge job. And Ebony, can you tell us a little bit about sort of what a bridge job is? Because I think a lot of people, they worry that if they took one, maybe that would just sort of sabotage their long-term career goals.
Yeah, absolutely. So a bridge job can be a variety of different things, right? Some people may want to look at some contracting roles that may be in line with what they've done previously. But it really is an opportunity for you to, again, check your finances and really figure out, okay, what do I need to do next? And so this bridge job is really going to be that thing that is necessarily it's not going to be the thing that you maybe do long term, but the thing to really get you over the hump until you decide on what it is that you do want to do. A contract roles are a great opportunity and a great way to bridge that gap until you find that thing. Some people have realized that while they've taken some contract work, that is the new industry that they wanted to get into, and it does allow you to get your foot in the door into new industries, into new roles. But most of the time, these bridge jobs are not long term. They're not the thing that you necessarily want to be doing, but the thing that does allow you that opportunity to really like keep the lights on while you're doing your job search into the thing that you really want to do. And as Andrew said, yes, I'm not saying that a pause is something that we have to do. We have to at least take that moment or two and say, okay, I just lost my job. I just have to reflect on this. What do I want to do next? Let's get started. That next day you're back on it. You're trying to really figure out and put the pieces together. Maybe it's having a conversation with your family, your friends, your loved ones to let them know what has happened. Because a lot of times layoffs are sudden. We didn't know that these things were going to happen. And so we do have to really jump back into things. But it is also the opportunity to figure out, what it is that you truly want to do. Do you want to go back to school? Do you want to get a certification? Do you want to start your own business? There are so many other things that you can do that maybe you have not necessarily had the opportunity to do because you've been so engaged and so involved in your career. And now this is the opportunity for you to really figure out what's that next best step for you.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And in fact, I see a comment here from Jill who said she's recently laid off and confused about which way to go. There are things I want to do, but then financial responsibilities step back in and seems to cloud my sense of direction. So I think that idea and that advice around bridge jobs will really help her. So,
Yeah,
Jill, I hope that
absolutely.
helps.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the time for you to look into a bridge job, look into doing some contracting, some contract work, and then really sit down and figure out, do some assessments and figure out what is it that you really want to do. How can I take what I've been doing and use those transferable skills to figure out what is next? Maybe it's a complete pivot. And I know some people have been laid off multiple times in the same type of work. So this is like, hey, I've seen like this is my second layoff within this industry, or this is my second layoff in this particular area. I want to now get out of this area, get out of this industry so that I don't continue to experience this layoff time after time. So you really have to decide, is this the thing that you really want to be doing with the remaining time of, in your corporate career, or do you want to be able to look at interests that you have outside of work and really be able to use those skill sets to land your next role?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And we have a question here from Jim. And I always like to touch on this topic in the show, no matter what it is, because I think it is so important. Ageism. And Jim wants to know, what if you're an older worker um, out there trying to get rehired if you get laid off? Do you have any tips for maybe workers who have had a longer career and suddenly they find themselves laid off?
Yeah, what I found that more recently with a lot of those particular workers who have a lot more experience is that their resume needs to make sure that you're not creating that bias inside your marketing documents, right? So what I always advise that you really only put 10 to 15 years on your resume. So like if you have all of this other experience, making sure you're not creating that inside your resume, right? So your marketing documents don't really need to go back to 20 plus years of work experience. So really a lot of that really has to do around the way you market your abilities. And I always tell people that we are all needed in the workforce, right? So whether you have, zero to little experience or whether you have, 20 plus years of experience, you are needed in the workplace, but it is about being able to articulate your value in the workplace. I mean, organizations, employers want people who have your experience, who have your skill set. So don't count yourself out before you even really start to get back in there. Just figure out how you can utilize your years of experience to benefit you.
Definitely. And we have a question here from Tigaraja. And they want to know, I got laid off from a job after just 2 months. Is it still okay to mention that job on my resume?
Yeah, I mean, if This is going to be one of those things that really is going to be up to you. I always say if you've only been there for a short period of time, you don't necessarily have to include it. But did you make an impact? Did you have some value within that 2 month time period? So this is going to be one of those ones that you really just want to. It's a case by case scenario. You can always put it on there, and then you can mention that you were laid off. But again, if you've been there a short period of time, usually typically less than 6 months, it's not something that you have to put on your resume. So you want to just use that as a case by case and see how it goes. But try both, take it off, put it on. But can you really communicate and articulate what you've accomplished in those 2 months? Did you really make an impact in that time period?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really good advice. And, Tracy wants to know, how do you handle job postings that already have hundreds of applicants? Should you still apply? And I think this is something that a lot of people they'll see like, oh, there's already so many applications. I never have a chance. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I say apply anyway, but this is the thing about that. I say apply, but also find ways to network with people who are in the organization. A lot of people who apply, especially if they're clicking just the easy apply button, may not necessarily be qualified for that role. So you don't really know who you're going up against. Most of the people who click those buttons don't they haven't tailored their resume, they haven't really communicated their value to the particular position. So make sure that before you do that, make sure that you have really communicated again in your marketing documents, in your LinkedIn profile, in your resume that you are the ideal candidate. Again, a lot of people take the resume and they just do a copy and paste to the position. They're not necessarily tailoring it to that role. So make sure you find those ways to stand out and then connect with the hiring managers, connect with people within the organization so that you can really start to build those relationships and really figure out if this is a role that you're actually interested in. Because job descriptions say one thing, but when you get in there, it's something completely different. So make sure that you understand like what is the role really looking for? Do I have that skill set? How can I solve the problem? Because really what organizations are looking for are problem solvers.
Yeah. And also, when you look at something that maybe has 200, 300 applications, the more important part is usually when was it posted? Because if you see a job that was posted maybe a month ago, the odds are that the recruitment process has already entered the hiring stages or second
Mhm.
or third round interviews. Because companies, even though a lot of people don't like to believe it, the hiring process, they try and move as quickly as possible. So it doesn't mean that your chances are zero, but the longer time goes on, the more they're involved in the hiring process. So even if they have 2, 300, 400 applications, but it was only posted maybe 2, 3 days ago, then they're still actively going through all those resumes. But if it's after maybe, 3, 4 weeks, it means that they've probably already got a really good pool of candidates. So that's something else to keep in mind. Do you agree, Ebony?
I agree 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so we have another question here from Bonnie, who says the absolute worst part is applying for roles and being completely ghosted by hiring managers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is, oh my gosh, that is something that so much about. And so for recruiters, we know that they are extremely busy. But I always say that it's great if you can get that feedback from recruiters and hiring managers in the process. That would be wonderful. But we know that, and a lot of times, recruiters and hiring managers, recruiters specifically, don't have the opportunity to get back to everyone. So that can be a challenge. I always say that if you have a relationship, if they've emailed you, reach out to them and ask for that feedback. So if they don't give you that feedback, follow up with them. I typically say to follow up at least twice. And if you haven't heard anything back, sometimes you just, gotta let it go, but don't let it mean anything about you. Don't internalize that, right? Like that just wasn't the right role for you. Um, there wasn't the right organization, but don't take it personal, don't internalize it, but definitely take the opportunity to reach back out to them because sometimes things fall off they fall off the radar. They're human too, life happens. So it is important to follow up.
Yeah. And also, I always tell people don't fall in love with the job until you have signed an offer letter and you're actively in the job because anything can happen between point A and point B. And the other thing I always
Oh,
remind people
absolutely.
about is that if you apply for a job and you don't hear back, that's not ghosting. So ghosting is after you've actually had several interviews and you've had discussions with people. If you've had sort of a tangible connection with that company, and then all of a sudden they just drop off, they don't respond to your emails, your calls, or anything else, that is ghosting. But if you just apply and you don't hear back, that's not ghosting. It just means that you weren't a right fit for the role they felt, and that they just moved on to someone else. So that's also important to keep in mind. Is just keep going until you actually get a job. So don't never assume you have a job until you're actually there in at the desk in the workspace. That's what I always tell people.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah. You're not there until you're there. So make sure you get the verbal is one thing, but you want to have it in writing, right? Like so until you get that written offer, continue to apply. And I say continue to apply even after you get a written offer because you just again, you never know what can happen. So keep going.
Yeah. And actually, we have a great follow up here from Rebecca, and she wants to know, how do you find out what to follow or who to follow up with when there's no specific recruiter or hiring manager listed?
Yeah, so good question. This there are, especially when you're applying to larger organizations, right? There can be hundreds, even thousands of recruiters. So find that person if you can who is specific to that department, right? So say it was customer success, there may be someone who's a recruiter in customer success. But if you can't find the recruiter, it's okay to reach out to hiring managers or someone who would be your colleague within that department. So don't just look for recruiters because people can lead you to those recruiters and other individuals within the organization. And recruiters get bombarded with emails and requests all the time. So sometimes going through the recruiter may not be your best option if you're looking to get something in a timely response, timely manner, right? So look for those people who you would consider your colleagues or counterparts, hiring managers, decision makers within the organization.
Yeah, I completely agree. And also, I think, like you said, just reaching out to someone within an organization, they can maybe pass it around and just sort of being that face of, oh, this person reached out. They seem really interested in the position. They can pull up your resume very quickly in their system. It
Mhm.
just gives you another touch point. Don't be annoying about it. And obviously, give it proper time for them to actually look at your resume.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I think some people, they jump the gun and they apply, and 4 hours later they're, sending an email saying, "Hey, did you hire for this job yet?" or something like that.
Yeah.
It's always good to have patience.
Yeah,
Um,
you have to in the job searching process, right? Like, I mean, it could take anywhere from a matter of days to a matter of weeks, a matter of months, right? So, you just never know. Like, there's no magic wand, and you just have to practice patience in the job searching process.
yeah. And we have a question that's sort of a follow-up to something you
Mhm.
mentioned earlier, which is, how do you effectively tailor your resume to a job? And I think a lot of people, they get confused about those.
Yeah, great question. It really is using the job description. The job description is going to be your roadmap to success, right? So, making sure that you have that job description and you're looking for the keywords that the job description has in there. Like the job description is really going to tell you what the problem is that the company is looking to solve, and then your resume is going to really communicate how you've been able to solve that problem using past experiences but using some of the words that the job description has in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, something what I always tell people too is like, when we talked about taking that pause and getting clear on actually what your next step is, if you realize, okay, I really want to be a merchandiser or something in a store, or maybe you want to be a sales manager, if you have a good idea of what you want to do, and then all of a sudden you read all the job descriptions and you synthesize those and you realize, oh, there's all these little pieces that are common threads. You can build your resume around that, and you actually can sort of ease the process of applying because you don't have to change your resume that much for each position. Don't you think so?
Yes, this is where clarity comes in. I'm like, once you're clear on what it is that you want to do, now you've narrowed in your search, right? I think a lot of people have this idea that I can keep my search wide open because I'm going to land something much sooner. But the thing about that is that you're constantly changing your resume and tailoring your resume to job after job. But once you've said, "Hey, I want to be a buyer planner, I want to be a production manager, supervisor," then you're only looking for those particular roles and you're not changing your resume nearly as much because you've now narrowed in and zoomed into exactly what you want to do. I always say this is like, if you shoot for anything. Like you're not going to hit any mark, but it's just like a dartboard, right? It's like shoot for the bullseye and then you'll get somewhere in there, right? But it's like when you're just shooting all over the place and then you start to get frustrated because you're like, I've applied for 100 jobs, I've applied for 200 jobs, and I'm not getting anything. Then you have to understand, like, are you clear on what it is that you want to do, and do your documents speak to that that you're clear? A lot of times we're clear about what we want to do, but our documents are all over the place. And once you see that bright, shiny new job that pops up, you're applying again, and it's like you aren't applying for those many jobs in excellence. And we've talked about this on the podcast, right? Like once I've narrowed in on what I want to do, I can now tailor my resume and I know that it's done in excellence versus trying to apply for 200 positions and you're not necessarily giving it 100% effort.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I use the analogy of a road trip, and it's sort of like if I started from where I am now and I didn't know where my destination was, I'll eventually get someplace, but it's going to take a while, and maybe I'm not going to be happy when I get there. But if I take some time and say, I really want to visit maybe San Francisco or the Gulf Coast or something like that, I can plot a journey and I know a more direct path to get there. And I'll probably be more happy once I get there because I'll say, hey, this is actually what I wanted.
Yeah, and
If
I'll
not,
take that
it's going
even
to
a
take a
step
while.
I'll take that even a step further, right? If you say I wanted to go to San Francisco and I wanted to be at this particular spot, right? Like that's what that clarity is, right? It's one thing to be in the city, but it's one thing to be at your exact location. And so like once you talk about like getting clear, like what industry do you want to be in? Is that healthcare? Is that tech? Is that finance? Like what industry do you want to be in? What is that role? What area of impact do you want to be in? Like there are so many things you have to get clear on. It's not just a matter of being clear on I want to be in HR, right? Well, like HR is in every organization. What particular organizations do you want to work in? It's one thing to say you want to be in tech, but what part of the tech world do you want to be in? So like you have to get very clear about what that looks like. If you say I want to be in, I want to work for a startup company in tech, in HR, in training and development, right? Like that's very clear. That's very specific. And that's when you can use your network to say, hey, I'm now using my network to say, hey, network, I'm looking for a job in tech, in a startup, in HR, in training and development. And those people can now help you and help you source for those roles. But if you just came to your network and you said, hey, I'm looking for a job in HR, like now you're leaving your network or recruiters or anyone else to kind of do that heavy lifting. And it comes continuously ask you questions like, well, what part of HR and what do you want to do? And all these other questions. It's like, but if you can get people very specific, then they're more willing to help you out and help you down that path.
Yes, specificity is really a golden sort of opportunity when it comes to being a job seeker because the more specific you could get, the better answers you're going to get, the more precise you can get. So I always tell people be more specific in everything you do when you're job searching, and it will reward you. And
Absolutely.
before we go, we have one more question. This is from James. Should you put all of your experience on your LinkedIn profile, for example, 15 years or more?
I say 15 years is okay. Like if you look back at my LinkedIn profile, and I recommend that you all do, go ahead. I have 15 years of experience on my LinkedIn profile. Yeah, I don't think that you have to have all of the experience. Again, you can make it very relative to the role in which you're looking for. So LinkedIn is one of those things where it's like a website. Like you can change it every day if you want to. You can really just go in there and have fun with it and try some things out. Yes, you can have 15 years. Yes, you can have 5 years. It really is going to matter like what are you trying to do and getting very specific. Do those jobs really apply to what it is that you're looking to do now? And if they do, then great. If they don't, then you can again make the determination about whether or not you want to keep those on there. Andrew, I'll let you provide more detail about that as the LinkedIn guru.
I wouldn't say I'm a guru, but what I would say is that the reason a lot of times recruiters will say, don't bother putting more than 15 years on your resume is because for most industries, that is what they're concerned about because technology has usually evolved, things like that. So you don't really always have to include those 15 years. What you can do is include all of it on your LinkedIn profile and then on your resume put a little career note that says gives a summary of maybe things that are older than 15 years, and you could always lead them back to your LinkedIn profile to see your full breadth of experience. And what I always tell people who are concerned about ageism is really use your age as confidence, as experience. And
Ooh, I like
obviously make
that.
sure Yeah, make sure you have the experience to back it up. um, but the one of the things is I think a lot of times as you get older, I fall into this trap the same way, is you end up sort of being cocky about the time you've put into an industry, and it's great to have a little bit of that, but still you're asking an employer to trust you to solve their problems, and at the
Yeah.
end of the day, that's what they're concerned about. They don't necessarily they don't care that I started 11, 12 years ago doing something else, because it doesn't give them a lot of relevance. But if I could tie that to what problem they're having and why I'm uniquely skilled to solve their problem, that's going to get me a little bit closer to the finish line. So walk in there confidently and actually, put A to B and say, I did this, 10 years ago, and this is why it's going to help you with your current problem. So own all of your experience. Be smart about how you advertise it, because obviously, it's not necessarily going to be relevant on paper, but then you could actually bring it together in the interview, on your LinkedIn profile, in your cover letter, things like that.
Yep, I agree. Yeah. I mean, we have to use all of our experience. I think even on the opposite side of that, right, where the individuals will say, "Hey, I don't have any experience." It's like, well, you do have experience. Maybe your experience wasn't paid experience. Maybe it was an internship. Maybe you volunteered, but you do have some experience. So don't count yourself out because you think you have zero experience, and don't count yourself out just because you think you have 20 years of experience. It's all relative to what it is that you want to do.
Yes. Well, Ebony, thank you so much for joining us. I hope
Thank you.
everyone checks out your profile. We were showing the link at the bottom of the screen. And obviously, I hope they check out our conversation on the podcast.
Yes, yes. Thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you. And I hope you all see why Ebony is one of my favorite career coaches on LinkedIn. She's always a joy to chat with. So thank you so much to Ebony for joining us. And Tamara, I saw you were asking about soft skills, and I have really good news for you, because this week on the Get Hired podcast, I sat down with Al D, who is the founder of Better Work Labs, and we discussed how to use soft skills. And you could check that episode out wherever you like to listen, and it'll be live on Wednesday, February 15th. And again, that's Al D. He's the founder of Better Work Labs, and he really talks about how you can use soft skills, those human skills, as a way to really propel you to your next job. So make sure you watch out for that on Wednesday. And because this is the way we are formatting this, take the questions that you have while you're listening to our podcast and bring them to this show. We'll be sitting down with Al on Wednesday, February 22nd and noon Eastern time. You can RSVP to the show using the link in the comments. My producers will be dropping in. It's a different date because there's a holiday in the US, but be sure you RSVP and you'll get a notification when we go live. And as always, thank you so much for joining us. I always enjoy this time we're spending together. I hope you found some information that will help you to get to your next step in your career and job searching. And always be welcome to join us here every week. And also check out the LinkedIn news page for additional information and programming, because we're always putting really great content and knowledge out into the world. And as always, thank you so much for joining us. It's a crazy world out there, so stay safe. And until next time, be well and best of luck.